Hey, welcome to the video. Let's get straight into this, I guess. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Modern Scope, where today we will be talking about the effect of the NBA bubble protests. These were sort of the protests for Black Lives Matters that the NBA did while in the bubble in Florida. Let's get straight into it. After COVID-19 hit the United States last year, the NBA decided to hold its season in a bubble in Orlando, Florida. The idea of the bubble was to have a place to finish the NBA season safely, but to the players, it meant a lot more. Around the time that this transition took place, there were many civil rights events that were taking place around the country. The players felt they needed to help make a statement during the bizarre time they were in. The protests that took place during the NBA bubble were very influential because the players protesting against civil rights events, such as the death of Breonna Taylor and the shooting of Jacob Blake, brought a lot of attention to wrongdoings in the world and our communities. After the tragic death of Jacob Blake, the NBA had enough. Players, coaches, and anyone else that were with the teams in the bubble all agreed they needed to do something in protest against the brutality attack against Black Americans in our country. On August 29th, just days after Jacob Blake's death, players on the Milwaukee Bucks and Orlando Magic refused to take the court for Game 5 of their playoffs in protest. Very soon, the rest of the NBA decided to do the same, and all games were postponed. Everyone felt the same sense of urgency to do something and to try and help make a change. Players, coaches, and team faculty all had meetings in the days following the postponement of the season to discuss what steps needed to be taken next. Even fans took part in protests just outside the bubble. A group of more than 24 people stopped traffic near the entrance of the NBA's bubble at Disney World to protest. When the NBA finally decided to play again, the players were not demure when speaking out against racism. Players began commentating every chance they got, including during post-game interviews on social media. There's been a push at the Disney campus of players using their media time to fan the heat of attention on Taylor. Even though players were not actually out in their communities and were stuck in the bubble, the NBA still found a way to send a strong message through their acts of protest against racism and police brutality. Although the NBA protests were not nearly as big as the Martin Luther King Jr. protests in the 1950s and 60s, they still had an impact on the NBA community and anybody who heard about them. From January 10th to January 11th in 1957, many black pastors and civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr., met to talk about further steps they could take in protesting racism in America, much like how the NBA players, coaches, and faculty all met during the NBA bubble to discuss what the rest of the NBA season would look like. Martin Luther King's protests were very inspirational and caused many people to realize what was happening in the world. The civil rights movement formed the guidebook for a new era of protest, and now the NBA protests have continued these peaceful protests in different ways. The NBA protests were the same in the sense of how they inspired many people to help with problems in their communities. King's protests and the NBA bubble protests were both very influential and helped people to realize that there are problems in our society that need attention. Anyone who follows the NBA at all will continue to hear stories of these protests and will continue to be influenced by them for years to come. Even if people are not protesting the same topics as the players are right now, the protests that took place in the bubble will continue to influence people to help make changes in the world and in the future. I believe the way that players handled themselves throughout the time they were in the bubble has set a great example for everyone who has learned about the experiences and challenges they had to face. The bubble protests were influential on many different people and will continue to be so for years to come. The way the NBA community helped to make a change in the world is similar to the way Martin Luther King Jr. and his followers helped to make a change in the 1950s and 60s. Even if it was not as apparent to some people as other protests in the past have been, the NBA players and faculty still had a huge impact on society, and the Black Lives Movement matters last year. Even with having to go to a bubble in Orlando to finish the season because of COVID-19, the NBA community still found a way to make a difference in the world and stand up for what they believed. Thank you for listening to this episode of Modern Scope. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend and a wonderful rest of the day. Goodbye. Thank you for watching this video of Modern Scope. I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe. We really appreciate it and it does help us out a lot. Have a great rest of the day.